has been a devastating week for Sri Lanka as a heavy downpours battered many parts of the country, affecting many lives and claiming the lives of nearly a dozen people. Hello and welcome. This is Vantage Point here on News First. I'm Shahin Jurangpati and we're joined by our guest, Dr. Dayan Jadalaka, former diplomat and political analyst. Dr. Jadalaka, welcome to the show.
Hi,
Dr. Jadalaka, as I mentioned, it has been a devastating week for Sri Lanka. So it goes without a doubt that an action plan for climate change in Sri Lanka is essential.
Well, that's not the only thing that's essential. Better maintenance of infrastructure is essential. Because so many people were telling me that though there were heavy rains over the last few years, the city was never flooded as badly as it has been this time. The last time you had that was in '92. Now, the reason is that there was a strong hand on the tiller, that is of Secretary of Defense Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who made sure that canals were dredged, that places were cleaned up. So now there has been neglect of all of that, and a lot of it has quite literally come to the surface with this huge floods. Nature sometimes reveals power structures in society. It happened during the cyclone of 1978. Suddenly you see what's not working, because people tend to make comparisons with earlier situations and the effects that they suffered or didn't suffer during earlier heavy rains. And I think there's a lot of public opinion building up, if you check the social media, as to how things have been neglected in the last year.
Dr. Jadalaka, sometimes you just can't really blame it on infrastructure, because over the past couple of days there has been the weather effect, the El Nino weather effect, and certain meteorologists and scientists have said that certain countries will have catastrophic floods regardless of the infrastructure development. So, and there's a saying that you cannot fight nature sometimes.
Well, you know, we've had heavy rains before, and it's not been said concerning Sri Lanka that catastrophic floods were expected, because I watched the BBC, I watched the news forecasts on international television, and you didn't have that kind of alert. Furthermore, if you take Cuba, which is subject to terrible cyclonic storms, the effect of those storms on Cuba is much less than it is in Florida, though the United States is a much richer place. The reason is that there is much greater priority given to protecting the citizenry in the national policy of Cuba. So I think that nature affects different countries differently, and that depends quite a bit on the policies that are being practiced in those countries. Katrina is a very good example. We recovered from our terrible tsunami better than the United States recovered from Katrina. I mean, I was in Washington DC, and I participated in a panel discussion where that point was made by Joel Schumacher, who was the head of Refugee International, and he compared Katrina, Sri Lanka, and Aceh, how Indonesia and Sri Lanka recovered after the tsunami of 2004. And he said that Indonesia made greater progress in conflict resolution after the tsunami. Sri Lanka made the greatest progress in rehabilitation and reconstruction. And the worst was Louisiana after Katrina. So, though it's a richer country, and though there was a natural disaster, the recovery time was much better in Sri Lanka. That's to do with policies, it's to do with mentalities, it's to do with the efficiency of the state. So I don't think that Colombo going underwater is unrelated to the problem of administration, and development administration in particular. There's nobody really in charge. You don't know who's running the country. You don't know who the go-to person is in any situation. The bureaucracy is fragmented. The state is fragmented.
So where should we start from?
Well, we start from making sure that we don't go beyond the 19th Amendment, because the 19th Amendment has already weakened the center, because had the presidency been as strong as it used to be, the president would have intervened, I dare say. But he can't, because under the 19th Amendment there is a fragmentation of authority.
Okay, Dr. Jathekar, let's move on from the weather to the country's political spectrum. Early this week, the National Victory Day commemorations were held, and the Defence Secretary said that the ceremony will be held in quite a small scale, and that, as mentioned every year, it will not be legally permitted to hold any commemoration ceremony to remember the LTTE. What is your stance on that, Doctor?
Well, in the first place, I think that anybody has the right to mourn their dead. If there were people who fought on the wrong side, on the LTTE side, and they were killed, their relatives, friends have a right to mourn them, but not as LTT, not in LTT uniform, not in LTT regalia, but as individuals, most certainly. The problem is that it has been named Genocide Week or something like that. I mean, now that's loaded. That's loaded. And that's not fair, because the whole world saw on television, real time, how 200,000 people who were trapped by the LTT as human shields were freed by the Sri Lankan Armed Forces in the last days of the war. Commandos and special forces lost their lives breaching the bunker band complex of the LTT to free those civilians. So it wasn't a day of massacre. That's nonsense. That's bad. But what the Secretary of Defense said was more important, and that's why there was a controversy last week about it. He said that the day will not be commemorated or celebrated as Victory Day, but as Reconciliation Day, because it was a war which took place within the country, and one does not celebrate a victory in such a war. Now, that's ridiculous. Firstly, it's illogical. Secondly, it's, in terms of facts, it's simply not true. But it's illogical because reconciliation was possible because of the victory. That's why we are tackling reconciliation now. Otherwise, we could have tackled it 25 years ago. It was not possible because there was a war on. And the war was started and continued by the Tigers, despite several attempts at negotiation by India and successive Sri Lankan administrations belonging to the UNP and the SLFP. So, it's like the European Union. The EU is a good thing, but the EU was possible because Hitler was defeated. And that's why there are commemorations, celebrations of the defeat of fascism. VE Day. And there's VJ Day, the victory over Japan. Now, reconciliation has to be embarked upon. And you may even have a day of reconciliation, a separate day. But the father of reconciliation was the sacrifice and the victory of our armed forces over terrorism and separatism. The whole argument is like, okay, on the birthday of the father, you're not going to celebrate the birthday of the father, you're going to celebrate the birthday of the son instead. Reconciliation being the son of the victory. That's just dumb. I mean, you celebrate Victory Day and you can have another day of national reconciliation. You don't have to sacrifice the celebration of victory in order to further reconciliation. What kind of reconciliation are you furthering if you're trying to brainwash people into forgetting the victory over terrorism? The other point is that you don't celebrate victories of wars that take place within a country. Now that, I'm afraid, is stuff and nonsense, because I hope to see the Secretary of Defense on Bastille Day, which is France's national day. And that's the day that celebrates the violent destruction of the prison of Bastille as part of a violent revolution in France. And it was not against some foreigner. It was a civil conflict. And that's the National Day of France. I mean, come on. The biggest military parade annually in all of Europe takes place on Bastille Day. I've been there as Sri Lanka's ambassador to France. Twice. It's a massive military parade. And that is on the day that they celebrate a violent revolution within the country.
Dr. Jatilaka, before we get carried away, I want to make one thing
No,
clear.
it's not carried away.
Dr. Jatilaka,
We mustn't get carried away by the lies
Yeah, Dr.
that you don't
Jatilaka,
celebrate civil conflict.
hang on, I want to get something clear. Did you said that you do not agree with the fact that a particular country celebrates a particular violent movement or a war?
No, I don't agree with the Secretary of Defence's argument, which is probably not his argument, but given to him by some person in government, that you mustn't celebrate Victory Day as Vijayagrahani or Victory Day because countries should not celebrate it was an internal conflict. Those who died on both sides belong to one country, therefore you don't celebrate the outcome. I mean, that is a lie. France's Bastille Day is one example. October 1st is the National Day of China. Why is it October 1st? Because Mao Zedong founded the People's Republic of China in 1949 on the 1st of October. What was that about? It was the outcome of a civil war. The Japanese invaded China in 1937 and that went on to 1945 when Japan was defeated with the end of World War II. But the civil war in China started in 1927. It recommenced in 45. It ended in 49. Millions died and Mao's Liberation Army defeated other Chinese. Chiang Kai-shek, who fled to Taiwan. That is the day on which China commemorates its National Day. It's the result of a civil war. Vietnam, April 30th. What is April 30th? Now, in 1975 on April 30th, the Vietnamese liberation forces led by the North Vietnamese army reunified the country by defeating South Vietnam, the pro-American puppet government and 1.5 million strong army of South Vietnam. It was a civil war. The Americans had stopped fighting in 1972 after the Paris peace talks. The Americans weren't involved. It was the presidential palace of the South Vietnamese government that was, really liberated by a North Vietnamese tank. I watched it when I was a kid on television. I was in Paris at the time. That's a civil war. Cuba. January 1st is the day they celebrate nationally. Why? Fidel Castro won a civil war, a revolution. And he came into Havana. January 1st is the day that they celebrate. Nicaragua, July 19th. I could go on and on. So it's absolutely untrue, which is a polite way of saying it's a lie, that countries shouldn't and don't celebrate the victories in a civil war context. That's why.
Dr. Jatilaka, don't you believe for a second that celebrating such a victory day or the fact that we won over the terrorism in the country with such glamour or either way will further aggravate separatism in the country?
Why? It was the defeat of separatism. How can it aggravate separatism? I mean, if you defeat separatism and you remind people that separatism was defeated because the nation rose up and fought, including Tamils, Kaunas people, the former Mahathir group, many anti-fascist Tamils also fought alongside the army. How does that further separatism? On the contrary, if you forget it, while all over the world the Tamil diaspora celebrates their Mahavira Day, they have pictures of Prabhakaran, they have pictures of the other guys who died in the tiger uniforms, they light lamps, they garland those things in Wembley Stadium in London, in Paris, carrying the tiger flag. They celebrate their fascist heroes. We don't celebrate our anti-fascist, anti-terrorist heroes who fought and died for the reunification of the country. If we don't do it, then we sure help separatism. And worst of all, we show ingratitude. That's sickening. People rose to the challenge, young men and women, for 30 years, not only the ones who died in 2009. Gamini Kuraratna of Hasalaka, running while bullets were penetrating his body, jumping on top of that improvised battle tank and putting 2 grenades into that. What was that? Captain Aladanian, who called an artillery and airstrike on his own position in Cockaville in 1990 because the Tigers had broken through. That's heroism. Fazli Lafi, Mulatibu, 1996. I could go on. What's wrong with us? I mean, we are still talking about the Greeks. And some of those wars were within the Greek Federation, some of them were not. But you celebrate heroism. Look at the movie American sniper. And that war wasn't even it was a horrible war where the Americans invaded Iraq. But it's a brilliant movie, and Chris Kyle is celebrated. People lined the streets for him when he died. He was the sniper with the highest recorded number of kills in US military history. Chris Kyle. He wrote his book American Sniper. If you don't celebrate, if you don't remember heroism, then what are you? Then your nation or government or society of cowards that celebrates cowardice. If you don't celebrate your heroes, I don't know how people look themselves in the mirror.
Dr. While it is agreed that yes, we should celebrate our war heroes who contributed their lives, who sacrificed their lives for the country during the war. Just a question: is it not fair to allow those north and east who lost their loved ones to commemorate their loved ones who died during the war?
Of course, they must be allowed to. But in Germany, nobody celebrates people who belong to the SS. They can go privately to the funeral and lay flowers. But you can't have a commemoration where you call the day that Germany was liberated with tremendous loss of life by the Allied armies, including the Soviet Red Army. You can't call it the day of massacre and then celebrate it with photographs of guys in SS uniform or Gestapo members. Privately, yes, but not in their role as fighters for fascism, which is what the Tigers were, and terrorism. This was not some romantic, liberation movement. These are guys who hacked to death babies in border villages who were sleeping with their mothers. You couldn't sleep in the village; you had to sleep out in the jungle. These were the world's worst terrorists, and the world is still fighting terrorism. Defeating them was a great thing for democracy and in the history of this nation. It should be celebrated officially as such, because what are the values that you're passing down to other generations? If a nation doesn't remember, we still see movies about World War II. Brad Pitt's movie, Fury. Quentin Tarantino's fictionalized Inglourious Bastards. Why are there movies still about World War II? Because people remember heroism. Band of Brothers, the TV series. Saving Private Ryan. I could go on and on. This is about World War II. What about the Civil War? They're still writing books about the American Civil War. Cold Mountain by Charles Fraser. There are books about the Nicaraguan Civil War. A poetess, Gioconda Belli, wrote The Country Under My Skin. So much. What's wrong with us? I don't understand this.
Doctor, now, is all of this helping reconciliation? From an exterior point of view, in terms of international society, they commend our reconciliation process. But internally, do you believe that there's our reconciliation process, there is progress in it?
Well, I believe there's progress in it, and there's nothing to do with the government. It's to do with citizens' initiatives. And this happened even under the previous administration. Don't believe me, talk to Muthaiya Muralidharan, talk to Kumar Sangakkara. There's nothing to do with the government. But because the war was over and the Tigers had been defeated, it was possible for people of goodwill to start dialogue with young people on the other side.
I want to talk about former President Mahinda Rajapaksa's recent visit to Uganda.
Yeah.
To attend Yoweri Museveni's 5th term in office. Now, Yoweri Museveni has been defined internationally by many of the world powers as an authoritarian ruler.
Who? By who?
Several countries around the world, UN human rights groups, humanitarian organizations.
Only the West.
At a time such as
not
this,
Russia, not China, not India.
Is it right for former President Mahinda Rajapaksa to attend a swearing ceremony?
I think it's good that he went there. I think it's good he went there. I'm not sure it was wise for him to get a ticket from the foreign ministry, and I don't know why. The foreign ministry seems to have been very happy to give him one. If he had asked for my views, I would have told him not to do that. But
so you deny the fact that you agree that former President Mahinda Rajapaksa should not have gone?
No. I think he should have gone. He got an invitation. He should have gone. And I don't see a problem with that, because 15 top leaders of Africa were there. It is good enough for the African leaders, including the most exemplary democracy in Africa, which we take as a model for reconciliation, South Africa. The South African president was there. 15 top African countries were present at leadership level at the investiture. So what's our problem? If it's good enough for the region, why isn't it good enough for us?
You mentioned South African President Jacob Zuma as an example here, but he too is facing several corruption charges as of late.
Look, everybody faces charges, so what does that prove? I mean, so what? Bill Clinton was impeached. Of course, it didn't succeed in the end. So the fact is that Jacob Zuma is the elected president and elected by a huge majority of South Africa, which we all rightly consider to be a model of reconciliation and democracy. And South Africa, which is the most shining example of democracy in Africa, and one of the best examples of democracy in the whole of the global South, did not see any problem in their leader attending the investiture of Museveni.
But Yoweri Museveni, president of Uganda, he did amend the constitution in 2006 to contest an unlimited amount of times in office.
Yeah, well, Margaret Thatcher was prime minister for the 4th time before she went gaga and imposed the poll tax and was thrown out by her own party. Did anybody say that she shouldn't have been prime minister 4 times? No. The United States had a 2-term limit on the presidency after President Roosevelt served 3 terms. He was in his 4th term. So, term limits are a good thing, but not everybody has term limits. The French brought in presidential term limits only a couple of years ago.
There are allegations against
in 2000 and something.
There are allegations against Museveni that he is grooming his son to come into power following his demise.
Okay, and Rahul Gandhi is not being groomed to succeed his father and his grandfather. Rahul Gandhi next door, the Congress young leader, 45 years old.
But
that's bad. He's not being groomed.
Does it not affect the credibility of former President Mahinda Rajapaksa?
Why?
A president who is accredited to ending the war in Sri Lanka to attend the 5th swearing ceremony of Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni, who is charged of amending the constitution, authoritarian rule.
Well, he will be discredited in the eyes of those in this country who view things through this prism of the West. And we've always had those people. It took SWRD Bandaranaike in 1956 to recognize the Soviet Union. The UNP didn't. I mean, it has some excuse. From 65 to 70, during the UNP government of 65-70, they said in Parliament that Chinese spies were taking photographs in Trincomalee. When Sri Lanka hosted the Non-Aligned Summit in 1976, the UNP called it a niggers banquet, Kabeli Magula. That's because these are brown people who think they're white people. So, when white folks say something about, Malcolm X used to say there are house niggers and field niggers. The house niggers are the black people who work as servants for the white people. And Malcolm X in his last TV interview, and it's in the movie with Denzel Washington as Malcolm X, he says, these house niggers, when the white master is ill, they say, "We sick, massa." Meaning, the black guy also feels that he is sick because his white master is sick. In Sri Lanka, we have people like that, and some of them are in government. They think that when white governments say something about a black leader, they feel that they are, because they are like house niggers. They take the same stance. They don't see that our brothers are the countries of the other third world countries. So when Dilma Rousseff of Brazil, one of the most popular presidents in one of the most populous countries of the third world, is impeached on grounds of corruption without even a charge that she took 1 cent herself, then we view it, some of us, not all of us, view it through the prism of the Western press. It's about people like this that Frantz Fanon talked about black skin, white masks. They've internalized neo-colonialism so much that they think they're white.
President Museveni, just a day before his swearing-in ceremony, the opposition leader of Uganda was arrested during his swearing-in ceremony, and he contested against President Museveni. Is that right?
It probably isn't, but that doesn't mean that one mustn't attend the swearing-in ceremony. I mean, like I said, if it was okay for the South African president and the presidents of 15 African countries, I don't see anything wrong in anyone else attending it.
Dr. Jadilka, quickly, let's move on to President Maithripala Sirisena's visit to London for the Anti-Corruption Summit. What is your take on that?
Well, apart from the fact that Prime Minister David Cameron's name was in the Panama Papers as well. I mean, I'm not saying that people whose names are in the Panama Papers are criminals or they necessarily did something wrong. But since there is a view that it's a little dodgy...
Isn't it David Cameron's father?
Yeah, but he had the account. He had the account until fairly recent, and then he gave it up. Okay? So, in any case, what gives Britain the moral high ground? These are the people who said that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction and participated in the invasion and destroyed the country of Iraq, and now there are terrorists swarming all over Iraq. I don't see Britain as holding the moral high ground on anything, really. They have a monarchy. Even neighboring France got rid of its monarchy in 1789, and the United States wouldn't even think about it. They are way behind in terms of constitutional development. And if any country did Sri Lanka harm, the most harm was done by Britain in terms of massacres, and these are all documented. In 1850, the British Parliament actually had they had hearings about the massacres conducted by the British colonial authorities here, because the Irish wrote about it and it was raised in the British House of Commons. So, the most damage in terms of leaving behind a ticking time bomb of Sinhala-Tamil friction, in terms of what happened with the hill country and the erosion of soil, in terms of ripping off artifacts belonging to us which they haven't given back. I think, and in terms of the Geneva Resolution, which is really propelled by the British rather than the Americans, the most harm done by any single country to Sri Lanka throughout our history has been done by Britain.
I may have to cut you short because we're running out of time. It's an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Till next time, I'm Shanji Rampati. It has been an interesting week, as you may have seen in the discussion. Dr. Jadilka, former diplomat and political analyst. I've been Shanji Rampati. Take care.